Jordan Peele's neo-Western horror Nope is a film that defies easy interpretation. I mean, sure, this is a movie with a theme.
It's about spectacle on set, or I said the most was spectacle. What I call spectacleization. Human addiction to spectacle. And business of spectacle. The techniques we developed on this to achieve spectacle, of making a spectacle. Spectacleization. Deals with spectacle, a spectacle. And I knew I wanted to make a spectacle, so...
But it's not as easy to point to one coherent reading of all the events that unfold in the narrative, right? At the center of it all is a question asked by Daniel Kaluuya's character, OJ.
What's a bad miracle?
And I'm excited to report that after months of searching, I found the answer. It's right here in this weird little Japanese found footage movie from 2009, Occult. That's right. It's these CGI tentacle blobby thingies. Referenced throughout Occult as UFOs or kiseki, which is the Japanese word for miracles, we begin to learn that these blobs are foreshadowing a terrible tragedy. But in her paper, Obscure Reveal Repeat, film scholar Lindsay Nelson calls director Shiraishi Kōji's special effects like this one very fake-looking. So, okay, these are a far cry from the visual effects of Nope, right? Jordan Peele's alien jean jacket in its final form is a tremendous visual effect. I was sort of overwhelmed when I saw it for the first time in the movie theater. Like, it didn't give me nightmares exactly, but it did make me feel like something much smaller and weaker than a human being. Which is what I am. Even though there are gestures towards organic materials here, like maybe a sheet of silk or a jellyfish, Jean Jacket doesn't look like something that could actually exist in the natural world. It's a well-crafted piece of CGI because it fits neatly into its visual environment, but we have no real frame of reference for what this creature is. It's outside the scope of human understanding. And even though the CGI in Occult does not fit neatly into its environment, even though we couldn't really classify it as good CGI, it accomplishes a similarly uncanny effect. By looking so unnatural and out of place, it represents something outside the range of visual information that we're naturally capable of processing. And isn't that exactly what a miracle is? Something that occurs outside the boundaries of natural law. Frogs and locusts act against their natural behaviors to punish the pharaoh. Liquid instantly turns solid beneath a man's feet. Biological death is reversed. But there's another component to a miracle beyond just this inversion of nature. Someone has to witness it. A miracle may be a sign of God, but it must always be seen and interpreted by a human. After all, the English word miracle can be traced back to the Latin verb mirare, meaning to admire or wonder at. We often think of our sight as being a source of objective truth about the world, but when we see a miracle, we're acknowledging something that exists outside of our understanding. More precisely, our sight and our understanding of the world contradict each other, and in that conflict, what we see takes precedence. It's an exception that proves the rule. Calling something a miracle is a way to reincorporate it back into our worldview. It may not fit into what we know about the world, but that's because God makes the world, and God gets to decide to break reality, to send us a message, or to mete out divine justice. Everything makes sense, and we know because sometimes it suddenly doesn't. And then life goes on. A bad miracle, then, is an inversion of nature that we see but can't accommodate, like these CGI blobs that just don't fit in Occult. The other interesting thing about the miracles in Occult is that they haven't all been captured by director and cinematographer Shiraishi Kōji. I mean, they haven't all been captured by his character, director and cinematographer Shiraishi Kōji. See, Shiraishi has a penchant for playing himself in his found footage films, lending an additional layer of pseudo-authenticity to a format that's already pushing the limits of realism in narrative film. Here in Occult, he is fictionally directing a documentary about a fictional murder-suicide that took place in 2005, a year that, by most accounts, did really occur. But the documentary is quickly derailed when Shiraishi and his team meet Ino Shohei.
病院だったんですけど、窓があってそこに木がいっぱいあるんですけど、その上にものすごいでかい UFO というか。
UFO っていうのは未確認飛行物体と言われる UFO。
Suddenly, Shiraishi is much more invested in documenting the strange things that are happening to Ino. We learn that Ino is homeless as Shiraishi follows him to a dollar store for groceries and then to a manga cafe to spend the night. By the following morning, Shiraishi's apparent objectivity as a neutral observer is beginning to deteriorate. He shares a meal with Ino and pays for their food as they wait together to hear back about a work appointment. We may begin to wonder whether Shiraishi's financial support is contingent on Ino giving him a good performance for the cameras. Not long after, Shiraishi agrees to let Ino house himself in his producer's office. By now, the crew has arranged to pay him to capture his own footage of the miracles, and in this way, Ino becomes less a subject and more of a collaborator in the filmmaking process. And so suddenly there's this question of who has control over the images we're seeing on screen, Shiraishi or Ino. By the end of the film, Shiraishi has ceded so much control in the name of supposed passive observation that he is actively abetting a terrorist plot.
Like a super small bomb.
Yeah. Hazel, let's do terrorism.
In Nope, OJ witnesses his own bad miracle when he watches his father die in a freak nickel accident. We later come to find out that that nickel was launched into his father's eye from the orifice of Jean Jacket, a creature that only has two modes of engaging with the rest of the world: consume or regurgitate. It becomes OJ's goal, along with his sister M's, to exploit this creature by filming it. At first, this might seem strange. In itself, filming Jean Jacket does not appear to bring OJ and M any control over their circumstances. It will not rescue them from the danger that Jean Jacket presents in their lives, but filming and distributing the image of Jean Jacket asserts that the natural world exists for our own human consumption. By subjugating Jean Jacket to this role in images, we're projecting that role into our own reality. This happens on two levels. First, OJ and M are at risk of losing their family farm, and they believe that selling Jean Jacket's image will bring them the income they need to support their business. Meanwhile, their neighbor Jupe was traumatized in his youth by a bad miracle of his own. Jupe is also attempting to capitalize on the spectacle of Jean Jacket. This mode of engaging with the world is natural for these three characters, given that they all work in the film industry. They've all been exploited in one way or another, and in turn, exploiting Jean Jacket is their opportunity to finally make it. But on a more abstract level, Jean Jacket represents an inversion of the natural order, a bad miracle. Modern humans are not supposed to be threatened by animals or clouds, or cloth, or whatever Jean Jacket is. Sure, a lion, for example, could kill and eat you, but we also put lions in the zoo and watch cute lion videos online. You could say the same thing for a crocodile or a chimp. We have largely transformed the natural world into an image that we consume for our own pleasure. That doesn't remove its power to harm us, but it does make it more shocking when it does so. We have this picture of some intrinsic hierarchy where nature is subjugated by humanity. This picture is constantly reflected back to us in film and television. But Jean Jacket doesn't fit into that picture. Jean Jacket consumes us. In this way, taking ownership of Jean Jacket's image is a way of neutralizing the ideological threat that it poses to us, to our assumed position at the top of the food chain. We can't control the alien's actions, but we can control how it is perceived. So, I hope now it's becoming clear that viewing something is also a way to gain control over it. You've probably heard of this thing called the male gaze. That term refers in part to the ways that women are often objectified through the action of the camera. The male gaze reinforces patriarchal values by asserting that it is natural and obvious for women to be objects that are viewed for sexual pleasure. These are the primary images we see of women on film. And because of the perceived truth of sight, we may begin to believe that these images represent some natural objective reality, even when they simply reproduce arbitrary power relations. Our belief in that natural objective reality, where women are objects for sexual pleasure, has ramifications in the real world. But there's another way that film can take control over its subject, and that's by assigning it a narrative. After all, isn't that the goal of a documentary about a tragedy like the one that Shiraishi covers in Occult? The stabbing in Occult is a fictional one, but the events that transpire aren't too far outside the realm of possibility. By viewing these events in some kind of linear order, starting with the perpetrator's childhood, the audience can start to make sense of them. To the extent that terrible incidents like this one throw our understanding of the world into chaos, documentaries like the one Shiraishi initially sets out to make in Occult are an attempt to regain control over the world, to give these events a beginning and, more importantly, an end, so that we can start to put them away. For Jupe in Nope, this is the function that the Gordy's Home SNL skit serves. It allows him to compartmentalize the tragedy that he witnessed so that instead of a traumatic first-person memory, it becomes a funny story acted out by unrelated parties.
Everyone's trying to celebrate Gordy's birthday, but every time Gordy hears something about the jungle, Gordy, Catan, goes off.
On the other hand, Shiraishi, that is the real-life director of Occult, doesn't really let us put away the tragedy that we witness at the beginning of the film. Instead, we follow him down a rabbit hole of lore that never seems to really end. We see more and more images, obscured by dodgy camera work or digital artifacts, and these images get us no closer to understanding. As Nelson puts it, the works of Shiraishi remind us that haunting dislocates not only our sense of real and unreal, supernatural and natural, but our sense that more images, more footage, add up to a more accurate and truthful picture of what happened. In the case of these films, what is illuminated serves to obscure just as much as it serves to reveal. It's typical for a horror movie to throw social order into chaos before reasserting some sense of the status quo in the end. Maybe there's a cute little sequel setup thrown in, but the themes of the story generally come to a close here. We see this in iconic horror images such as the final girl vanquishing the slasher killer, the broken family coming back together, or the cops finally catching the bad guy. For now. Even when the good guys lose, they at least lose decisively. Occult and Nope each end on images that may at first seem clear. But if we dig a little deeper, we find that they nonetheless fail to answer some of the questions raised by their respective narratives. I don't just mean that it's not exactly clear who lived and who died. By the end of Nope, we're no closer to understanding the nature of Jean Jacket. We don't know what it wanted, we don't know why M and OJ's plan worked, and we don't even really know what effect it had. And without saying too much about the ending of Occult, because I think you should go and watch it, if you haven't, a lot of the lore introduced throughout its story also remains hazy and unresolved. Nelson talks about how in many Japanese horror films, ghosts and the occult cannot ultimately be understood or defeated. Rather, they must be lived with. Both Occult and Nope deny the audience that feeling of control over the narrative that comes from seeing a story through to a clear, definitive thematic ending. And that absence of control reminds us that really, even though we have power over the images we observe, someone else still has power over us. The filmmaker. Documentary films often have a way of making us believe that we're looking at some objective reality. The filmmaker melts away. All their techniques of writing, editing, and cinematography appear to be in service of the truth rather than any specific human viewpoint or agenda. Of course, this isn't true. The documentary filmmaker is just as much an auteur as the narrative filmmaker, selectively drawing our attention to certain things and concealing others, or juxtaposing images in ways that lead us towards specific conclusions. Occult and Nope subvert this image of the filmmaker asserting power over the audience by showing that filmmakers lose control in the same way that their subjects and audiences do. Discussing the Blair Witch Project, film scholar Jane Roscoe wrote something that I think all of the best found footage films, including Occult, tap into. At the conclusions of these films, we are left only with the knowledge that we cannot trust documentary form to tell the truth. And Nope asks us to further wonder whether we can put our trust in any film images at all.